Good morning, everyone. We'll be kicking off in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Thanks for attending. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending. We're just waiting for a few more people to log in, and we'll be kicking off in the next 2 minutes. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's webinar, Beyond VPNs, the Future of Remote Access with Windows Virtual Desktop. My name is Finian Nally. I'm Head of Microsoft Cloud Solutions with ActionPoint. I've been with the business a number of years now, and I head up the Microsoft practice within ActionPoint. I'd also like to introduce on our call today is Alan Canan. Alan is the Senior Technical Azure Lead with MicroWarehouse. Alan's been working in IT for over 15 years now and has been working with Microsoft Azure since 2015. Alan holds multiple Azure certifications across security, infrastructure, and many, many more. And Alan will be helping us out with some of our technical insight and live demo today. So to kick off and to look at what we're going to cover today, we're going to have a chat briefly about today's remote working challenges. We're then going to dive into Windows Virtual Desktop, give you a sense of what that is, and specifically go into some key scenarios as to where it could be relevant and useful for you and in your organization. We'll then go under the hood. Alan will go into some of the more deep dive technical aspects as to what makes Windows Virtual Desktop so great, why it's, I suppose, heads and tails above anything you would have seen before. And then we'll actually go into a quick demo just to show you Windows Virtual Desktop in action. There's a questions panel over on your right-hand side. We'll be taking questions throughout the presentation, and hopefully we'll get to answer them at the end. But before we fully kick off, I just want to launch a quick poll, just up on your screen there now, just really asking what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced in delivering effective remote access. So if you wouldn't mind just completing that poll there, just selecting which option relates to you, we can gather some data and maybe chat about some of the key concerns that are coming through towards the end of the presentation. So I'll just leave that poll open for a couple more seconds. I can see the answers coming in there now, so that's great. Thanks for responding there. Perfect. So to talk about today's challenges, really what's actually happening out there. And I think the first thing to consider when we talk about the challenges is really down to our expectation. And if we look at, today's webinar and the three hosts that are here, myself, I'm based in Mullingar, Alan's up in Dublin at the moment, and Peter, who's behind the scenes, is down in Limerick. And you, our audience, are based in multiple different locations. But we all have an expectation that this is going to work perfectly. The slides are going to work well. If there's video or audio there, it's all going to be perfectly, high quality and without issue. There's an expectation there. Likewise, when we're using consumer technology, be it WhatsApp or Gmail or Dropbox or even our Netflix or anything like that we're using on a regular basis right now, we expect it to work consistently. There's an expectation there that it's just going to work. But why then, when we think about our office technology or office applications, do we have a lower level of expectation? Do we expect things to go wrong? Do we expect, it not to perform, as well as we would like it? And when we look at today, today being what does our IT platforms look within our organization, really we see something like what's on the screen right now. Our platform is based on something that's just good enough. We have a lot of legacy back office applications, versions of servers, etc. Our technology strategy has been somewhat questionable. We've different devices and we respond on demand or in a reactive way for devices for end users versus having a proper technology strategy around those devices. And I suppose bringing into that as well, or feeding into that, is the fragmentation that has built up in our business over the last number of years, especially given the speed of technology and the speed of change, but also the additional fragmentation that has been introduced over the last 2 months. Feeding all of that in together means that actually, we as IT professionals and our end users and even our business owners have a somewhat, lukewarm expectation of our own in-house business IT versus consumer IT. And given that we're spending a significant amount on our business IT, we should have a better expectation and we should be demanding a better experience. I suppose if we think about the remote working scenario that essentially we've all, or the majority of us, have been forced into over the last couple of months, I almost put it down to, remote working in 60 seconds. Leo Varadkar made his announcement and immediately everyone had to react. And, to try and summarize what happened and what we saw, there was really 2 key scenarios there. One was, businesses who'd never really had a remote access before, that never delivered true remote access to people. Yes, people had mobile devices and could access their email on the go, but now all of a sudden they needed to get access to all their applications regardless of where they are. So laptops were sent out rapidly, VPN licenses were added, but ultimately, that has led to an okay experience. The business has survived, has kept going, but the experience, both from an end user and a security point of view, has been, lower than average. In addition, we've seen some businesses who have had an element of preparedness for remote working, but they've had to scale. They've gone from a scenario where they've had the ability maybe to deliver remote working to 50% of staff, but now they've gone to a scenario where they have to scale that up to 100% in a rapid amount of time. And those similar challenges, upping VPN licenses, dealing with poor performance and poor equipment, have all been factors of that. And really, we've come from a scenario where no one has been really prepared for this. And in considering all of this, in pushing that remote access out there, not only prior to COVID-19 and everything that's going on with all of that, we really haven't asked a few key questions. The first one is, what about the end user experience? How are we ensuring that the experience an end user has is actually good? Are we delivering a solution that has a cumbersome connection process? Are we giving them equipment that is different to what they use when they're in the office? Are they finding that they don't have all their key applications, or even the applications that they have don't actually work properly, or maybe only work 50% of the time? So ultimately, we're not only delivering that poor user experience, but we're also feeding back into the poor performance of the business and wondering, why does it take longer for people to do things? Why isn't the business singing and operating as efficiently as it was before? From an IT point of view and from a business risk point of view, often we fundamentally haven't considered proper security when we think about, the setups that we've delivered over the last couple of weeks. We've adopted the same security posture as we have that's within our office, maybe single-factor authentication, just standard username and passwords. We haven't adopted things like multi-factor authentication, like conditional access. We haven't considered that, right? People are now coming in from home networks where there are other devices on the network, where there are other users on the network. And we also haven't considered, right, the fact that shadow IT is increasing, that people are maybe going off piste and saying, well, actually, I need to share files with my colleagues, but our organization really doesn't have a tool to share files properly. So I'm just going to grab the latest and greatest one off the internet and start putting our company data in a multitude of different places. So again, we've tried to deliver that remote access solution to our team, but we actually haven't considered the real security and business risks around that. And as well as that, this gets further compounded by the scale. You know, our expectation is, well, we had a firewall there, we had a VPN solution, we can offer remote access, but the reality turns out to be very different. Yes, we can add in more licensing and we can bolster it, but again, back to that point about the end user experience and the security, they're also very questionable. And with the benefit of hindsight, you know, the questions are sometimes asked, well, why didn't we consider this sooner? Why didn't we have a solution in place to allow us to adapt, to scale, to offer a true remote access solution with a great security, with great end user experience? The reality is the solutions that were out there, you know, like traditional VDI on-premise solutions, took a long time to get up and running. They were very expensive and very complicated to consistently manage and to scale. So when we actually sat down and we looked at, you know, VDI solutions in the past, often from not only an IT point of view, but also a business point of view, the cost and the extra resources needed to manage that simply weren't justifiable. In addition, a lot of our legacy apps, we may have thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if our legacy apps performed better, if they were modernized? It would be nice, but again, there's a lot of complexity that goes with an application, not only from a fundamental application development point of view, but also from speccing the application, managing that application, training the end users, all of those kind of things. And again, as business owners and as IT professionals as well, when we looked at the cost benefit of that, really it wasn't there at the time. So it's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, we could have had something better than what we have right now. But in reality, you know, it probably was never going to happen. So I think that's really where Windows Virtual Desktop comes into play. Windows Virtual Desktop is the first solution which really addresses all of these issues in a modern fashion, in a scalable fashion. And it's, you know, Windows Virtual Desktop is what's classed as the best virtual desktop experience delivered on Azure. A couple of key points and a couple of key differentiating factors. It gives you all your applications and all of your data together in one location, but it's fully optimized for Windows 10. It is a Windows 10 desktop. So if we think about some of the solutions that we may have used in the past, often they look like a Windows desktop, but a lot of applications don't really perform that well. There's a lot of nuances from an end user point of view that really, you know, don't make them effective remote access solutions. Whereby using Windows Virtual Desktop, the fact that it's Windows 10, if I'm using Windows 10 on my desktop and I'm using Windows 10 on my virtual desktop experience, they're the exact same thing. It's fully optimized for Office 365 as well. So we're leveraging all those cloud tool sets that a lot of businesses are using right now, and more businesses are going to. And it allows us to scale very, very rapidly as well. In addition to that, I suppose it's allowing us to eliminate our legacy VPNs. So that scenario of having a cumbersome connection into a VPN solution back into our on-premise network, you know, slow applications, all of those kind of things. Windows Virtual Desktop is eliminating that process. It's making it very, very seamless for the end users, and we'll actually demo that in full later on. Like I said, we're giving that user the familiar Windows 10 experience. There's nothing different what they're using on a day-to-day basis. All our data and all our applications are available anytime, anywhere. So regardless of what device I'm on, where I'm coming in from, I'm getting my applications available to me. And I have the choice to operate, be it in a full desktop mode or just on an application-only mode. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But as well, fundamentally, security is built in, not added on. I think that's one of the key points with Windows Virtual Desktop over and above a lot of solutions. You know, many of the solutions that we've seen in the past, it's a case of, right, here's your remote access solution, but as an afterthought, we now need to bolt on these layers and layers and layers of security, which, you know, add up in terms of actual euro value on a consistent basis. With Windows Virtual Desktop, security was not an afterthought. It was baked into it from the ground up. And all those kind of modern security tools, the likes of multi-factor authentication and conditional access, device management, etc., are baked in from the ground up, which makes it very, very effective. Windows Virtual Desktop, it's really giving you the best virtualization experience. Like I said, it's available on any device. So be it my Windows laptop, I can connect into my Windows Virtual Desktop environment, or be it on my tablet, my phone, my Mac device, whatever device I'm on, I can now deliver a full application or a full desktop to my end users and give them that common experience throughout. It's also allowing me to, I suppose, use some of the enhanced protocols, not only on the security side, but also, on the dynamically adapting bandwidth side. So in other words, if I'm coming in over a 4G connection or some connection that may not be the best, I'm still getting an optimized experience. It's also eliminating some of the, I suppose, the thorn in the sides or issues that we would have seen in the past around remote desktop experience, slow login experience for users, having to worry about where their profiles were, corrupt profiles, all of those kind of things. It's using modern technologies like FX Logics to actually containerize those profiles, so to put the data in a siloed container, meaning that it's easily accessible for the user, regardless of which host they're on, but it's also much more secure from the business point of view as well. And there are many, many more features in there as well. But to talk about some key scenarios, why would I use Windows Virtual Desktop? What are the benefits for me as an organization or as the IT admin or IT director within an organization? First scenario I want to talk about is legacy applications. And this is something we see an awful lot, and certainly as an IT professional, over the last 20 years, I've had my fair share of updating applications, installing new applications where there's a lot of heavy lifting involved, both in terms of the back-end system, server upgrades, those kind of things, and also in terms of client endpoints, from using group policies to roll out applications to dealing with the issues that are associated with that, and even in some cases for applications to go around to individual desktops and laptops and having to upgrade things. That is painful, it's cumbersome, it's time consuming. And especially when we're in a scenario right now where, remote access has been forced on us. We don't have the ability to actually start to go around and update a lot of endpoint devices, laptops, desktops, etc. We also don't have the ability to push out new applications because, again, maybe people are coming in from poor connections and we dare not upgrade the accounts package, even though we actually have to because revenue have said we need to, implement their new guidelines, or we don't want to update to the latest CRM package because, the current version we've customized in some way, and if we upgrade, we're going to lose that customization. So there are a lot of challenges around actually managing and delivering applications effectively. With Windows Virtual Desktop, we can say, well, actually, let's just start with one application, or let's start with all our applications and deliver them to the end user. And the beauty of that is we install it and we configure it once. So we configure it in the Windows Virtual Desktop environment once, and then we can push it out to a group of users, a select pool of users, or all our users, depending on what that application is. From the end user point of view, that application is no longer running on their laptop or their desktop or whatever device they're using. It's running in the cloud. So the experience that they get is consistent. I get the exact same experience if I'm in the office, on my normal desktop, or I get the exact same experience if I'm on my laptop, working from the couch at home. As well as that, the ongoing management is centralized. So again, as the IT provider, I'm worried about, right, where's the data? How is the application managed? All of those kind of things. The only thing I have to consider is the central point within Windows Virtual Desktop as to where that application sits. I don't, again, need to worry about all the different users and types of devices there that they're running on. I also get the ability to start to control versioning a lot better. We might have, some of our users running the 2012 version of a particular application, but we've decided to roll out the 2015 version of that application now. How do we do that? In the past, we would have had to say, well, listen, let's invest in more servers, let's invest in staging servers or sandboxing or those kind of things. Now we can very, very easily do that and deliver the newer application, or actually deliver both applications to a select group of users or all our users. So we get that ability to be very, very flexible to our end user to say, well, actually, we have some legacy applications. We know they don't work over VPNs, or they're challenging over VPNs, or there's some security issues with them. We're going to put those applications in Windows Virtual Desktop, and we're going to deliver those applications to you regardless of which device that you're on. I think the next scenario to talk about is that the challenge of a consistent user experience. And I suppose this not only applies in the current scenario we're in, but it's quite common as our workforce gets more and more mobile, as people not only are working from home and in the office, but as people are traveling and as people are using different devices. People are not only just using laptops, they're using mobile devices. I often use the analogy, if I go into the Vodafone shop right now and ask for the latest iPhone, it's probably going to cost me in or around 11 or 1200 euro. If I go online and try and buy a laptop, it's going to cost me pretty much the same price. So the power of our mobile devices and our laptops is on par right now, and in some cases it's actually even better on the mobile device. So our user's expectation is, well, I should be able to access my applications, I should be able to access my desktop, and everything I do regardless of which device I'm on. With Windows Virtual Desktop, we're actually able to deliver that very, very seamlessly. We can deliver every single application that the user uses, but we can also start to balance things better to say, we have an accounts person who runs a CPU intensive report, a month-end report once a month. Why do we need to give them a high spec, really, really expensive machine just to run that high intensive process once a month? How about we provision that tool on Windows Virtual Desktop and we scale that up once a month so that it's ready for them to run the month-end report very, very efficiently, and we scale back down at the end of the month. Likewise, we may have some of our team involved in engineering or graphics or something to that effect that really only need certain components or certain tools, be it a CAD tool or some other kind of high intensity CPU tool, maybe once a month or maybe a handful of times during the year. Again, we don't want to incur the cost of saying, right, we have to buy expensive equipment for that person who's using it in a very, very ad hoc fashion. Let's deliver them a Windows Virtual Desktop. It has a standard desktop that has all their applications, but let's also deliver them a high spec Windows Virtual Desktop as well that they can dip into once a month or once every few weeks or whenever they need to use that particular application. So we get very, very flexible, but we get that consistent experience for the end user. And what that means is the previously lost time from an end user point of view around waiting for applications to load, waiting for things to run, and the questions, where are my applications? I can't access this, that, or the other. And the lost time that IT would have spent, trying to assist those users are now eliminated. So Windows Virtual Desktop gives us that experience regardless of which device we're on, be it a PC, laptop, mobile device, as I said. The last scenario to consider, and again, there are a lot more, but one of the key ones that we see is around business continuity. And I suppose when we have a conversation with our customers around business continuity, typically, I suppose the conversation goes something along the lines of, yes, we have backup, and yes, our servers have a disaster recovery solution on them, and they are replicated either to the cloud or to our second site, which is 2 miles down the road kind of thing. So we're good from a business continuity point of view. I think the reality is there's an awful lot of things not considered in that scenario, and one of the single biggest one is your end users. While you may have DR and while your servers may be replicating somewhere else, what happens when your office goes, or what happens when your users need to access those critical systems and they're in a failover mode? How are they going to actually do that? They don't have access to your office, your VPN solution is down, there's no connectivity in. How are they actually going to do? Maybe all your users are desktop users, you don't have laptops, you don't have a second site for them to actually physically go to. So the business continuity aspect isn't really considered. Yes, our servers can be booted up in our secondary site in the cloud or wherever, but our users can't actually access them. They can't actually use the applications because we haven't considered the continuity aspect. So what we do actually do at Action Point is we leverage Windows Virtual Desktop to deliver what's called a cloud hot site. So by using Windows Virtual Desktop, we have our servers replicated in a normal DR fashion, but we also have on standby mode those desktops ready for the end user to access. So in a scenario where we need to turn things on or where business continuity needs to be delivered, the end user simply accesses their Windows Virtual Desktop environment very, very seamlessly. It's the same environment that they've been using, whether they're in the office or at home, but it allows us to scale up very, very rapidly and deliver a true business continuity solution. A few other scenarios just to consider, and a few other areas that may be relevant. Where else does Windows Virtual Desktop help things? Security and regulation, financial services, healthcare, those type of business where you've got a lot of sensitive data. Using Windows Virtual Desktop, you're keeping all that data centrally. You're not delivering it out. You're not syncing it locally with PCs or other devices. All your data is central at all times, meaning that you can provide that security layer and you can provide that assurance to your clients that your data is always protected. Likewise, thinking of an elastic workforce, some of our businesses now may be scaling down. We may have been in the unfortunate situation of having to lay off staff for a period of time or even permanently. So how do we actually, balance our IT environment to do that? How do we scale our IT environment back down? Well, with Windows Virtual Desktop, we can scale things down, but we can also scale back up very, very quickly. Maybe we need to burst out to have some additional call center staff. maybe actually this has created an opportunity for our business to acquire some of our competitors. With Windows Virtual Desktop, we can scale our IT systems up dramatically. Also thinking of the likes of specialized workers, I kind of alluded to it earlier on, where I may be in software and have some dev test requirements that I use intermittently. Likewise, I may have some specialist design and engineering tools that I need to use on an ad hoc basis. With Windows Virtual Desktop, I'm able to say, well, actually, we have our high-end graphic intensive machines ready and waiting for you to use when you need them, because we know that you're not going to be using them 24/7 or for 80% of the time that you're actually working. And in those 80% of the times, we can give you a standard desktop to do your Word and Excel and your email, etc. So we're able to get very, very dynamic with those specialized workloads. In terms of security, and this I've mentioned it a few times already, I think it's important to take a step back. And we've seen solutions in the past where people have said, yeah, we have a remote desktop or desktop as a service solution. And when you actually start to drill into it, the question marks start to appear about security. I mentioned earlier on about security built in from the ground up. But by using Windows Virtual Desktop, we're leveraging, I suppose, the power and the security of Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure currently has a global footprint of 58 regions worldwide and is accessible in over 140 countries. In addition to that, the level of certification that Microsoft Azure has is second to none. And that in turn is mapped onto Windows Virtual Desktop. I think there's close to 100 odd different certifications from ISO, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, etc. So in terms of that confidence, or giving you that confidence to know, okay, where are my systems running, or where's my data running, Azure gives you that confidence. In addition, I suppose some of the key security features that are in there, I mentioned a few times, multi-factor authentication baked in from the ground up, reverse connect technologies. So there was always the classic thing with remote desktop technologies that a hack was delivered because someone left the remote access port open. With Windows Virtual Desktop, there is no port open. All the incoming ports are closed. So we're delivering a secure solution immediately. We're also able to deliver that granular access and control. So from our IT team, who actually needs access to configure the servers? Well, they don't need access to the data. Who needs access to configure the applications? Well, they don't need access to other things. And as well as that, we're delivering isolated user sessions. So those user sessions are containerized, meaning that it's completely isolated for that end user and that end user only. So with that, I'd like to go a little bit deeper, and maybe we can get an insight into some of the technologies. I'd like to invite Alan onto the call. And Alan, I'm just going to share control with you there. Give me a second. You should have the keyboard and mouse, Alan, to take over.
Okay, thank you, Finian, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alan Canan. I work in the technical side of Azure, so doing lots of solution architectures, deployments, even pricing solutions, but working on a lot of Windows Virtual Desktop solutions at the moment. Microsoft themselves say that they've seen a threefold increase on Windows Virtual Desktop since the COVID-19 pandemic took hold, and that just shows why this has become a very important technology on Microsoft Azure. So I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail on the technical side about how it works from an architecture point of view. So Windows Virtual Desktop is exclusive to Microsoft Azure. It's very much an Microsoft Azure play. You can host in any of those Azure regions. So Finian just showed a slide there with 58 Azure regions. Some of those are kind of protected for US government and so on, but the vast majority of those regions are available to you. So it's very much a global service. You can host it in most of those Azure locations wherever your customers sit. Have your data kept within those regions, so you can keep your data in the EU, or if you've got a US customer, you can host it in the US regions. And how it works is you will host your session host. So that's the servers that your users will connect into, and that's where all your applications are installed, etc. So that's very much up to you to manage. So your partner like ActionPoint will manage that service and maintain those applications and make sure those machines are kept secure and up to date. Microsoft hosts the back-end infrastructure, so the gateway service, the connection broker, so all these roles that previously you would have to maintain yourself under remote desktop services are now hosted by Microsoft under Windows Virtual Desktop. So Microsoft keep these in a highly available configuration, so you don't have to worry about doubling up on gateway servers and connection brokers and so on. That is hosted by Microsoft and kept highly available on the global front. You just manage your session hosts. And then as Finian mentioned earlier, in terms of the client connectivity, it's really whatever type of device you have, you can access this. So obviously Windows devices, you've got web clients and a Windows client. iOS, so Apple devices have their own client, Android devices have their own client to access it. But even if you don't have a client, so if you have, say, like a Chromebook and you just have a web browser, you can still access this using the HTML5 clients that I'm going to demo shortly for you. So really all you need is a browser and an internet connection, and you can access this service from any device. Just moving on from that then, if we look at how the connectivity works, as I mentioned, you have to manage your session host. So that's your server, your virtual machine that you're hosting on Microsoft Azure. That has an agent installed on it that basically is listening to those Microsoft hosted gateway services. So again, no matter where you are in the world, you will be able to access this via your nearest Microsoft hosted gateway. So that's automatically taken care of for you. Microsoft have these located all over the globe. So your session host machines are listening for an incoming connection from that gateway. So how it works is, you look at the left side there, you initiate a connection from one of your clients, so either a web client or a Windows or an Android or an iOS client. You make that connection into the Microsoft hosted gateway service, which is hosted by Microsoft. Then that makes a reverse connection into your managed infrastructure, so into your Azure environment where your session host is located. So the good thing about this is you do not need to open any inbound ports, because it's like a reverse connection. What's happening is that agent is listening outbound. It's an outbound HTTPS connection on port 443, listening to that Microsoft hosted gateway service. When that sees an incoming connection from that gateway service, it lets it into the environment. So it means you don't need to open any ports. So traditionally you would have had to open inbound ports, maybe port 443 inbound or port 3389 for RDP access inbound. You don't need to do any of that. It's all taken care of for you. And you also don't need any VPNs. So we were talking about VPNs earlier. There's no need for a client VPN connection here. It's all done through the public internet. But because it's a reverse connection, you don't need to open up any ports into your environment. So that makes this much more secure than any other solutions that are out there today for VDI or hosted desktop infrastructure. This is a new feature and makes this solution much more secure. What are the benefits over remote desktop services? Really, this is to me, it's the successor to remote desktop services. Remote desktop services have been around for quite a number of years now. If you've been around long enough like I have, you may notice as terminal services. This was really the first iteration of remote desktop. Remote desktop is still alive and going strong today, but to me, this is a natural successor to that. I think this will probably take over from remote desktop services in most environments. The main difference for me is the end user experience. I mean, now you can finally do this on Windows 10, as Finian mentioned earlier, whereas remote desktop is exclusive to Windows Server. So you're basically getting your users to connect into a Windows Server environment that you just made to look as close as possible to Windows 10. The other good thing about this is it's a multi-session version of Windows 10 if you wish to have that. That is another exclusive feature to Windows Virtual Desktop. So what that means is you can host a Windows 10 environment on a single virtual machine if you like, and have multiple users connected into that. So you could have 5 or 10 users perhaps sharing that same virtual machine, all connected into it at the same time. This dramatically reduces your costs. So rather than having a dedicated machine for each user, you can have multiple users sharing the same resources. So that brings your cost down quite substantially. The other things you can use are FSLogix containers. I'll talk about that shortly. That's a way you can containerize your user profiles. Finian mentioned that also. That gives you much better optimization for the likes of Office 365. In terms of the deployment, because Microsoft will be hosting all those gateway and connection broker roles, these are previously roles you would have to deploy yourself on Windows Server. And this also would mean you would normally have a lot more virtual machines to manage. So you'd have virtual machines acting as your gateway and your connection broker. So more virtual machines for you to deploy and maintain. So a lot more maintenance, a lot more cost, but even in terms of the initial deployment, all of that is taken care of for you, so you don't need to even do that. That also means a lot less troubleshooting. So if something goes wrong and someone can't connect in, you don't need to start looking at, well, why is there something wrong with the gateway or the connection broker database? Have I renewed my SSL cert? You don't have to troubleshoot those things because Microsoft are looking after that element of it for you. That bit is part of the Windows Virtual Desktop service. You're simply troubleshooting your session host environments and the connectivity around that. There's no SSL certs to renew every year. That bit's taken care of as well. And as I mentioned, no ports to open up. You do not need to open any inbound ports into your environment, and that makes a huge difference from the security perspective. Because it's a cloud service, you get all the features you would get with any cloud service in terms of scalability and elasticity, so you can easily introduce more resources into your environment, scale it out, so add in more session hosts. So if your organization is growing, you can very easily scale its environment out, or if you need to reduce the spec of things or turn systems off, that can be done as well. So you can scale in as well as out. That's very easy to do. It's all consumption based, so you can adjust your environment according to your current requirements. And because it's hosted on Microsoft Azure, you get all the integrated benefits you would get with other Azure services, such as the likes of Azure Security Center integration. A little bit more on the security side of things. So obviously, as I said, you don't need to open any firewall ports. That means you also don't need any public IP addresses. So your environment does not have a public IP address. So you don't have that security footprint of having public IP addresses that can be probed by various bots that try to use brute force attack attempts on RDP, because it comes in through a reverse connection through that Microsoft gateway service. That's not hosted by you, so you don't need to worry about your environment. And as I mentioned, no SSL certificates. So that's another cost you would normally have on an annual basis renewing SSL certificates. You don't need to do that. No ports need to be opened up. It's just that outbound 443. 443 is HTTPS. So most websites nowadays are hosted on HTTPS protocols. So normally that would be open anyway for outbound access. So you're not doing anything that you wouldn't normally be doing there. It's a reverse connection into your environment because of that outbound 443 access. Another important feature is because this is leveraging your Azure Active Directory credentials, so that's your Office 365 logins, you can leverage the likes of multi-factor authentication with this service. Trying to do that with remote desktop services, it's possible, but it's quite a difficult thing to set up. Whereas if you've got Windows Virtual Desktop, it's built on Azure Active Directory authentication. So you just have your MFA set up on that, and it leverages that. Very easy to integrate. So the profile problem, Finian spoke a little bit about this. This was a problem with remote desktop services for quite a while. A few different ways you could do this. If you're familiar with roaming profiles, you'll know that's where you can have a profile copied to your machine at the point of login. So this means no matter what machine you log into, your profile would get copied down to that at the time of login. The issue with this was it was slow. It would take a while for your profile to copy over the network to that machine. And then when you log out, it has to be saved back to the server where your profile is stored. So a lot of issues around timing with that, and potential for profile corruption was quite high with that as well. It happened quite frequently. With Windows Virtual Desktop, you can use a solution called FS Logics. This is a company Microsoft acquired a little while back. This allows you to containerize your user profiles in a single file. So basically in a virtual hard disk file that can be stored off the, not on the session host you're connecting to, but either on a different virtual machine, or you can use a serverless environment like Azure Files to store this profile. So what happens is when the user logs in, rather than copying that profile across the network onto the session host you're connecting to, that profile just gets mounted across the network as a disk essentially. So when the user logs in, it appears as if the profile is stored locally on that machine. What this does for applications is that the applications think that the profile is local on the machine. So they think it's on the C drive basically of the machine the user's logged into. And that means those applications perform optimally. They think, okay, the profile is on this machine, and it just allows behavior and features and functionality to work as if that user profile is stored locally on the machine, even though it's actually not. It's stored somewhere else in the environment. So this, in particular for Office 365, will allow you to do a lot of things you weren't previously able to do with RDS environments, particularly around search indexes that normally wouldn't work very well in this environment, where your search history would get wiped every time you log off. A couple other features with this, whereas you can use something called app masking, where you can hide certain applications from certain users. So if you've got an environment where you have all users logging into the same session host, but you don't want the finance people seeing apps that other departments use, and you don't want general users seeing the finance applications that only one or two people in the finance department use, you can basically hide these on a user level using a feature called app masking. Another important feature is Java redirection. So for those applications and websites that need to use Java, and in particular versions of Java. So if you're familiar with online banking, you'll know notoriously every time there's a new release of Java, this normally breaks the online banking login. So you need a very particular version installed. You can have, rather than installing all these different versions of Java, you can have a particular version of your Java runtime installed and configured for a particular application or website. That means that if it's an old version of Java that may be considered insecure, generally speaking, and you don't want that available for other users, that can be locked down and restricted to a particular website or application. So this solves that problem for you. So a lot of good features with FSLogix, and this is included as part of the Windows Virtual Desktop Service for no extra cost. Talking about the profile containers, this is the main feature of it. So as I said, these are user profiles stored as VHD or VHDX files. So that's a virtual hard disk file stored on a separate location. So they can be stored on a disk on a file server machine in your Azure environment. Or as I mentioned earlier, you can use a serverless technology such as Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files. Basically, that's a file storage solution that doesn't require a server, a virtual machine to host it. Profiles get attached when you log in. So no matter which session host you get logged into, so if you have a big environment with maybe 10 session hosts, you're not going to be necessarily logging into the same session host machine every time you log in. You could get logged into any of those 10 machines. But what happens is, no matter which machine you log into, your profile just gets mounted to that across the network. You work away as if your profile is local, and when you log off, that profile just gets dismounted. So perfect for those non-persistent environments where you're not logging into the same machine every time. So no local data, no user data gets saved directly to the session host. All your data for your profile, as in your desktop and your documents and your settings, are all kept in that profile VHD file, which is kept on in a separate location, not on the session host machine. So solving a lot of issues around user data with this. So just a little bit more about the options for storage. As I said, you could just store that profile on a data disk on another server. But what a lot of people are looking at now more so is the likes of Azure Files. So as I said, that's serverless technology you'd use for storing the data. So rather than having to deploy yet another virtual machine, spinning that up just for the purposes of storing data, you could use an Azure Files storage share, put your data up there. This will give you a lot more benefits around performance. You get much better performance, disk performance using this, and this now has integration with Active Directory permissions as well. So this allows you to do basically anything you could do previously on a standard network file share, you can do now on Azure Files as a serverless technology. And then for bigger environments, you've got the likes of Azure NetApp Files, which gives you even better performance. Again, so you can get really high disk performance without having to provision a really high-end virtual machine with really high-end disks just to get that level of performance. So lots of options. The cloud always gives you great options, and there are more and more options becoming available all the time. But this is a common solution now for FSLogix profile containers. Solving another problem is around applications. So that's user profiles, that's your user data, but what about your applications? I mentioned earlier, if you might have a single session host for your entire organization, so you might have finance people logging in, HR people, legal people, engineers, all sorts of different types of users with all sorts of different types of applications. So obviously you could just overload that session host and install all the applications that every department needs on the one session host. You can hide them using that app masking feature of FSLogix, but it's a lot to maintain for the IT department to have to constantly update that machine for every department. So FS Logics, as we saw, allows you to attach the user profiles when they log in. But what about the applications? Well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to attach applications on the fly based on that user? So if a finance user logs in, have the finance applications, the likes of Sage, get attached to that session when that user logs in and get detached when they log out. And likewise, if a HR user gets logged into that same session host, having the HR applications mounted to that session while that HR person is logged in, even though they're on the same machine, just having the applications attached on the fly. Well, this is now possible with a solution called MSIX App Attach that allows you to do this. This is in preview at the moment, so it's not quite ready for production environments, but this will allow you to attach those individual applications just for that session. So again, regardless of whatever session host the user gets logged into, the applications that that user needs gets attached just for that session and then detached when they leave. So this allows the maintenance, the updates for those applications to be managed in a much more organized fashion by the IT department. So it just means you don't have to keep rebuilding your session hosts anytime any application needs an update. You can just manage each application individually, store those somewhere like your Azure Files location, and just have those mapped to that user session when that user logs in. So this solves that problem with application management. And I think this will be the future for applications. So let's have a look at a demo of this. So I have a test environment that I have set up. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate, first of all, the web client experience. So as I said, you don't need a Windows machine for this. You don't need a piece of software to connect to it. All you need is a browser. So this could be a Chromebook with just a Chrome browser installed. And using a HTML5 client, you can log in here. So I'm just going to log in with my test user account here. This is just my demo environment. Put in my credentials. And that's because I had this session open earlier. Let's try that again. And as you can see, I'm getting prompted for an MFA login. So multi-factor authentication is wrapped into this because it uses my Azure AD, my Office 365 logins. I just got a prompt sent to my phone there, which I've just approved. This makes this already a much more secure option. And as you can see, I have a number of applications published here and desktops. So that's an important point, actually. You don't just need to publish a full-blown desktop, remote desktop. If you want to just publish applications, individual applications. So if you've got a finance department, you could just publish Sage. If it's a HR person, you could publish just the HR applications. You don't necessarily have to give them a full-blown desktop. But let's just show the desktop experience. I'm just going to connect into that now. And this would be, if you wanted to have a full desktop experience where you can access, your network file shares, all of your applications, the usual systems, the usual things you would have access to as if you're in the office, have those made available to you there. I'm just going to enter my credentials again here. So again, this is routing through that Microsoft hosted gateway service and then firing from there into my my own hosted environment where I've got my desktop. So as you can see, I've got a full-blown desktop in a web browser here, so I can go in and I can open my Windows Explorer. I can access, if I had file shares, I don't think I've got any set up here, but if I had network file shares, I could access those here. If those network file shares were on premises, I could still provide access to those using a site-to-site VPN in Azure. I've got all my applications down here at the bottom. I think I've got Teams open here, so I can obviously use Teams in that remote environment. I've only got the Office apps installed here, but I can easily launch Excel here and start working away in Excel. So again, I've got my remote desktop fully accessible through a web browser here. That's the web client. I'll quickly show you the desktop client for Windows. So this is a piece of software you install on Windows. And as you can see, I've got the same applications and the same desktops published here. I'll just launch another one. If you've got a Windows machine, this will give you a better experience than the web client. The HTML5 client works quite well. You will find the resolution isn't quite as good as the desktop client, but it's perfectly usable. But this will give you a nice, smoother experience. I'm now remoting into, it's actually a different session host. I'm just logging into this here, connecting to my FS Logics profile. As you can see, Bill Gates is my test user. And again, this could be a different session host. This could be a host for my finance department machines that I can log into. Let's wait for that to come up here. So this is a completely separate host. So this could have my finance applications versus my other ones. Again, same experience, just a different way of accessing it. And just to show you quickly, I want to show you I've got some applications published here as well. So I could log into Microsoft Excel. This is opening Excel. Now, this seems like I'm just opening Excel from my own machine, but it's not. This version of Excel is actually running from a Windows Virtual Desktop environment. As you can see, I'm logged in as Bill Gates here. I know it looks like I'm running that from my own machine, but I'm really not. And just to show you another nice feature of this is the client. But if I go to my Start menu, and if I just scroll down to my tenant here, you'll see the same applications. So it actually publishes these same desktops and applications to my Start menu. So I can actually pin these directly to my Start menu. I can create desktop shortcuts. And if I want to open Microsoft Access here, I don't have Access installed on my local machine. If I click on Microsoft Access here for my Start menu, it launches. Again, this is hosted on Windows Virtual Desktop. I can now use Microsoft Access. So again, if you wanted to host, for example, Sage for your finance department, you could publish that here as an application. Your user could just go into the Start menu, click on the Sage shortcut, and it will open up as if it's installed locally on their local machine. I think that's a really great feature. That's about it for demo. Very quick and easy, just to show you the basics of it. But I think that shows you how easy it is to use. Once you have it all set up and ready to go, very easy to publish these desktops and publish additional applications to your users. And that's what the experience would look like from the end user point of view. I will give it back to Finian, and I think we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards.
Great, Alan. Thanks very much. Great overview and great insight. Really, for me, some of the key features there are the ability to have the applications in your Start menu, that seamless experience for the end users. They don't actually even realize they're using Windows Virtual Desktop. Their application is available to them. But for you as the IT provider or the systems admin, all that is running centrally. The application is running centrally. The data is centrally, but it's still the exact same experience for the end user. So really a quick summary, what have we seen today? The key scenarios, the three key areas. I can deliver my applications. I don't have to migrate fully to the cloud. I can just deliver a slice of my applications or a subset of my applications to my end users. Or I can turn around and say, actually, do you know what? I'm going to deliver a full desktop experience to all or some of my staff. Again, giving that consistent experience regardless of which device they're on. I can also leverage this as a business continuity tool. So leverage an Action Point Cloud hot site, meaning that I still am leveraging my on-premise investment, but I have that ability to have a full-blown business continuity solution ready to be invoked whenever we need it. And the key things to remember, centralized security and data, no more VPN problems. It's a fully managed service. Action Point, we deliver a full managed wraparound on that so that it's fully monitored, supported, and optimized on a consistent basis. It's constantly updated. I think Alan mentioned, we've gone from terminal services to RDS. Windows Virtual Desktop is now the solution of choice for Microsoft for remote access, and it's been updated literally on a daily basis at the moment, and is on their roadmap for many, many years into the future. But also fundamentally, it gives you time back. It's as the IT pro or as the business owner, it's giving you plenty of time back, but also from the end user point of view, it's giving you time back because things just work. So where to start? What are your next step? I suppose really speak to us. We're more than happy to have a conversation after this webinar. We've delivered many Windows Virtual Desktops POCs for clients who are just looking at their first application. They have problem applications. How can we address that? Also talk to us about business continuity, and maybe as well if you're looking at moving fully to the cloud with our cloud migration service. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think a few questions have popped in to the box already. I might just refer to the survey that we posted at the very, very start. I suppose some interesting results. Really, I suppose these are the trends that we're seeing consistently among many of the people we talk to. Security is always number one, and with the additional risk that's been introduced with remote access, we're seeing more and more challenges around that. But as well as that, more and more new and modern ways to address the security challenges. IT support issues and poor performance, yeah, we're seeing that on a consistent basis, and certainly Windows Virtual Desktop goes a long way to address that. So just to jump into some of the questions there, Nara issued a few questions there. How does Windows Virtual Desktop access on-premise servers? The thing I'm talking about the whole time here is eliminating VPNs, but if you need to access on-premise systems, VPN or express route is the way to do it. But remember, you're going data center to data center. In other words, you're going from the Microsoft data center to your own on-premise data center. The difference being, what we're trying to eliminate here is the VPNs from your client's endpoints, from your end users' laptops and home locations into your primary site. So data center to data center through VPN. Can we integrate with on-premise Active Directory domain service? Absolutely. Back to my point about, if you don't have to be all in for the cloud here, your domain controller can still fundamentally sit on-premise. What we recommend is a replica domain controller is delivered in Azure, again, just to keep resources close to each other. So yeah, lots of flexibility there around Active Directory services. We'll just see, are there any other questions? Yeah, Aidan Healy there. Aidan, yeah, integrating with on-premise legacy applications. Again, we have that ability to go data center to data center. What we are very conscious of is, where we have an application, we want to make sure that as much as possible that application is in the cloud. Where you're accessing data, we can use some of the synchronization technologies that Alan mentioned, the Azure File Sync to sync data between your on-premise and the cloud. So it means, again, going back to that end user experience, the solution that the end user is accessing is always in the cloud, and we're not having to traverse VPNs. But more than happy to talk in more detail about that offline, Aidan. How do I work when I have a long flight is one of the questions there from Paul. The answer is, Paul, you don't. You sit back and relax, enjoy the flight. Certainly there are, with some of the tools that we demonstrated, there are some offline modes to it. Naturally, if you're looking to use certain applications and you don't have connectivity, you're just not going to be able to use them. That's a given, regardless of whether you're on-premise or using Windows Virtual Desktop or any solution. But certainly we can talk to you more detail about that. A few questions there around cost and licensing. Cost and licensing is pretty straightforward. Really, there are two elements to consider. It's the Azure cost and it's your Microsoft 365 licensing. So Microsoft have greatly simplified the licensing here. Once you have a Microsoft 365 license, that gives you the rights to run Windows Virtual Desktop. There are other nuances in there insofar as if I have existing RDS licensing with software assurance, I can use that as well. So there's a lot of other nuances in there, but they've kept the fundamental licensing simple. I need one license for Microsoft 365 per user, plus my Azure cost of my actual servers running in the cloud. I think that pretty much covers most of the questions. Just if you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the questions box there. My details are on screen, so certainly if you want to reach out at the end of this, feel free to email me. I'd like to thank Alan for coming on the webinar as well and giving us great insight into the technical aspect and giving that demo. So thanks again, Alan. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up if there's no further questions. I just see one last question there. Yes, we will be sharing the content afterwards. Peter will be sending out a mail following this webinar with the recording of the webinar and the content of the slides as well. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye.